I knew something had shifted the moment my daughter-in-law walked past me in the hallway without saying good morning, not a glance, not a nod. She had her phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something someone on the other end said, and she walked right past me like I was a coat rack, like I was furniture, like I was nothing. I stood there in my own house, the house I had paid for, the house I had scrubbed and painted and fought the bank for over 31 years, and I felt something small and cold settle in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. People have bad mornings. People get distracted. I went to the kitchen and made my coffee, and I told myself it was nothing. That was 8 months before everything changed. My name is Lorraine. I am 64 years old, and I spent most of my adult life being the kind of woman who holds things together. That is what my mother taught me. You hold things together. You don't complain. You show up. You make the casserole. You write the check. You drive the 2 hours without being asked. You are the one people count on, and you count that as a blessing. I was a bookkeeper for 22 years at a logistics company in Raleigh. I raised my son Caleb, mostly on my own after his father and I divorced when Caleb was 9. My ex-husband moved to Phoenix and called on birthdays when he remembered. I worked overtime when the school needed fees I didn't have budgeted. I fixed the gutters myself one October because I couldn't afford to hire someone. I learned to be enough. I learned that I had to be. Caleb grew up fine. Better than fine, I thought. He was quiet and thoughtful as a boy. The kind of child who would bring me a glass of water without being asked when I looked tired. He made decent grades. He stayed out of trouble. He got a job in logistics. Funny how that works. With a company in Charlotte, and he was making more money at 32 than I had made at 50. He met Renee 3 years ago at some work event. She was striking, I'll give her that. Sharp cheekbones, sharp laugh, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately understands its social geometry. She and Caleb got married 14 months after they met. Small ceremony, nice enough. I told myself I liked her. I told myself that for a long time. The arrangement started simply enough. About a year into the marriage, Caleb called and told me they were looking to move to a bigger place. Renee's commute was getting long. They wanted space for a home office, maybe eventually a nursery. The rent on their apartment was going up, and the kind of house they wanted in Charlotte was expensive. He didn't exactly ask if they could move in with me. He sort of circled around it in the way he'd done since he was a teenager, when he wanted something he thought I might say no to. He mentioned how much they were paying in rent. He mentioned how far the drive was. He mentioned that my house had that extra bedroom and the finished basement. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Of course I did. He was my son. I told myself it would be good to have the company. The house had been quiet since I retired. I told myself it would be temporary, a year maybe, just until they saved enough for a down payment. I had a number in my head, 18 months at most. They moved in on a Saturday in March. I made a pot of chicken and rice. I bought good wine. I told myself this was going to be wonderful. The first few months were manageable. Renee was polite in a surface way, the way people are polite to someone they are tolerating. She would say thank you when I cooked. She would occasionally ask about my day, but there was always something slightly off about it, the way you can tell when someone is performing a thing rather than doing it. She had opinions about the house, small ones at first. She thought the living room furniture was dated. She mentioned twice that the kitchen lighting was poor. She asked once, casually while standing at the counter, whether I had ever thought about renovating the downstairs bathroom. I laughed it off. I said maybe someday. By month 4, she had rearranged the pantry. I came downstairs one morning and nothing was where I kept it. The coffee was on a different shelf. The mugs were somewhere else entirely. When I asked her about it, she said she had found a more efficient system and smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. I let it go. I let it go the way I had been letting things go my whole life. The money started so gradually I almost didn't notice. Caleb had always borrowed from me occasionally, a few hundred here, help with a car repair there. Nothing alarming. And now that they were living with me, it made sense to share some costs, groceries, utilities. I didn't mind. I was retired, I had savings, and he was my son. But then it expanded. Caleb asked if I could cover his car payment one month because they'd had a big expense. Then it was the next month, too. Then Renee mentioned she needed some work done on her car, and somehow I was the one who paid for it. There were groceries charged to my card at stores I didn't shop at, a subscription service I didn't recognize on my bank statement that turned out to be a streaming platform Renee used, a dinner charge from a restaurant I had never been to. I asked Caleb about it once. He said Renee must have accidentally used the wrong card. He said he would take care of it. He never took care of it. I want to be clear about something, because I think people look at situations like this from the outside and wonder how a grown woman doesn't see it, how she lets it happen. And I want to tell you that it is not stupidity. It is not weakness exactly. It is something more complicated than that. It is the particular blindness that comes from loving someone. It is the story you keep telling yourself because the alternative is too painful to look at directly. My story was he is under pressure. He is young and his wife is difficult and they are trying to build something. This is temporary. This is what mothers do. I told myself that story for 11 months. The dinner was a Tuesday in November. It had been a cold week. The kind of November cold that comes in under the doors and settles in your bones. I had been feeling it more than usual. My knees had been bothering me, and I had spent most of the day resting, which I hate to do, but sometimes the body insists. I heard them come in around 6:30. I heard the sounds of the kitchen, the refrigerator opening, the clink of things being set out. I thought Caleb was cooking. He used to cook sometimes in the early months, and I had always been glad for it. I came downstairs at 7 when I heard them sitting down. The table was set for 2. There was a cast-iron pan on the stove, and the smell of something good. Garlic, beef, rosemary. 2 plates on the table, 2 glasses of red wine. Candles even. Renee had lit candles. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Caleb looked up, and there was something in his face. Not guilt, exactly, more like the face of someone who has made a calculation and is committed to it. He said, "Oh, Mom, we didn't know you'd be up. There's some leftover soup in the fridge from last night. You can heat that up." Leftover soup. I had lived in that house for 31 years. I had paid the mortgage on that house through a recession, through a divorce, through years when I worked 2 jobs to keep the heat on. I had written the checks that kept the lights on in those rooms, and I was being sent to the refrigerator for leftover soup while my son and his wife sat at my table eating steak by candlelight. I didn't say anything. I have turned that moment over many times in the months since, and I have thought about all the things I could have said. But in the moment, I just looked at the table and looked at Caleb, and then I went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time, and something inside me, something I had been managing and rationalizing and smoothing over for nearly a year, went very quiet and very clear. I want to tell you about my granddaughter Nadia, because she is part of this story in a way I did not expect. Nadia is Caleb's daughter from a brief relationship before he met Renee. She is 15 and she lives with her mother in Greensboro, but she comes to see Caleb on some weekends and school breaks. Renee has never been warm to her. Another thing I had filed away and tried not to look at directly. But Nadia was warm to me. She would come into the kitchen when I was cooking and sit at the counter and talk to me the way teenagers sometimes will when they feel safe with someone. She told me about school and her friends and the things that mattered to her. She was funny in a dry, quiet way. The weekend after the dinner, Nadia came to stay. She found me in the backyard on Saturday morning, sitting with my coffee. She sat down next to me without being asked. She said, "Grandma Lorraine, are you okay? You seem different." 15 years old, sharper than anyone in that house gave her credit for. I told her I was fine, and then, because she was looking at me the way people look at you when they actually want to know, I said, "I've been doing some thinking." She nodded. She said, "I heard what happened at dinner." I looked at her. she said. The soup thing. I didn't know what to say to that. She reached over and put her hand over mine for just a second. A small gesture, the kind that costs nothing and means everything, and then she said, "You should do what you need to do, Grandma. You don't owe anybody your whole life." 15. I went to my bank on Monday morning. I want to describe this carefully because I think it matters. I was not shaking. I was not crying. I got up at 5:30, before either of them was awake, and I made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and my folder, the one where I keep account statements and financial documents, and I went through everything. It took me 2 hours. I wrote down every charge I didn't recognize over the past 11 months. I totaled it up. The number surprised me even though part of me had known it was coming. It was more than $9,000. $9,000. I sat with that number for a while, and then I put the folder in my bag, and I got dressed in a good blouse and my navy slacks, and I drove to the bank. The woman who helped me that morning was named Sandra, and she had short gray hair and a patient, no-nonsense way about her. I sat across from her, and I explained what I needed. I needed to remove Caleb's name from the joint account we had added him to 2 years ago when I thought it would make things easier. I needed to cancel the additional card that had been issued. I needed to change my login credentials, all of it. Sandra didn't ask unnecessary questions. She pulled up the account and she helped me do each thing methodically. When we were done, she looked at me and said, "Is there anything else I can do for you today?" I said, "No. I think that's everything." I walked out into the November morning and sat in my car for a minute. The sky was doing that thing it does in fall, where the light is thin and pale, and everything looks very still. I thought about Caleb as a small boy, bringing me that glass of water when I looked tired. I let myself feel the sadness of that for exactly as long as it asked to be felt. Then I started the car and drove home. I also called my attorney that week. I have a will. I made it years ago and I had not revisited it in some time. I called the attorney's office and made an appointment and went in and sat down and told him I wanted to review everything. I told him I wanted to make some changes. I am not going to say exactly what those changes were because some things are private, but I will tell you that when I walked out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Like I had set down something heavy I hadn't realized I was carrying. I also talked to Renee's sister that week, not to cause trouble, but because I needed to understand something. She and I had spoken a handful of times over the years, and I had always found her to be more straightforward than Renee. She told me carefully that Renee had grown up in a household where her mother had supported everyone, had always been the one to handle the money for the whole extended family, and that Renee had a deeply held assumption that the women in her life existed to resource the people around them. I thanked her for telling me that. I hung up the phone and I thought, that is not a wound I can heal. That is not a wound that is mine to heal. I did not sit Caleb down for a dramatic conversation. I want to be honest about that. People expect a confrontation scene, raised voices, truth finally spoken into a room. Catharsis. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and in some ways harder. About 10 days after my trip to the bank, Caleb's card was declined at a gas station. He came home and found me in the kitchen and asked about it. He was confused at first, then something shifted in his face. I told him I had made some changes to my accounts. I told him I had also been going through the statements and that I had found charges I didn't authorize. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my hands flat on the kitchen counter, and I looked at him and I told him the number. He was quiet for a long time. He started to say something about Renee, about the expenses being higher than expected, about meaning to tell me, and I held up my hand. Not unkindly, but clearly I said, "Caleb, I need you to hear me. I love you, and I need you to understand that things are going to be different now, not because I am angry, because I have to be someone who respects herself, and I haven't been doing that." He sat down at the kitchen table. He looked in that moment very much like the 9-year-old boy whose father had just told him he was moving to Phoenix. That look broke my heart a little and also told me I was right. Nadia was the one who, in the end, said the thing that reached him. She was there the following weekend, and she asked Caleb to take a walk with her, just the two of them. I don't know everything they talked about. She told me later that she told him she had watched me be generous her whole life, watched me give and make myself small, and that it had frightened her. That she was afraid of becoming someone who expected other people to disappear for them. She said she told him, "Dad, you became someone I don't recognize, and I think you know that." She said he cried. She said she had never seen him cry before. I believe her. Things have changed since then. Caleb and I have talked more in the past 4 months than we had in the 2 years before. Real talking, not the surface level checking in that passes for conversation in families where everyone is managing something. He told me things about his marriage that I had suspected but never known for certain. He told me that Renee had, for most of their relationship, controlled the narrative of their finances in a way that had made him feel like a passenger. That he had been afraid to look too closely at things because he was afraid of what he would see. I told him that afraid is not the same as not responsible. He said he knew that. He is in therapy now. I consider that a good sign. Renee and Caleb are still together, which is their choice to make. She has been more careful around me since the change in the accounts. She no longer rearranges my pantry. She says good morning in the hallway. I am not holding my breath that she has fundamentally changed, but I have changed, and that is the part I can do something about. They are still living in my house. I know people will wonder about that. Wouldn't it be cleaner, tidier, more satisfying if I had asked them to leave? Maybe. But I thought about it carefully and I decided that was not what I needed. What I needed was to stop disappearing. I can be in my own house and be present in it. I can cook what I want and sit where I want and expect to be treated like a person. I can hold the boundary and not have to exile anyone to do it. The day I took my life back, truly and fully, was not dramatic. It was a Wednesday morning in early December, gray sky, coffee getting cold on the counter. I pulled out a puzzle. I love puzzles. I always have, but I had stopped doing them because Renee had once made a passing comment that the puzzle pieces on the dining room table were a nuisance. I spread the pieces out across the whole dining room table, all 1,000 of them. I left them there for 3 days. No one said anything. I worked on that puzzle every morning in my housecoat with my coffee going cold beside me, and I thought about how many things I had quietly stopped doing because someone might find them inconvenient. How many little pieces of myself I had folded away. I found every one of them. I think about what Nadia said to me in the backyard sometimes. You don't owe anybody your whole life. She said it so simply, the way teenagers sometimes say things that adults have forgotten how to say. I have been thinking about the particular mathematics of generosity, how it is a gift when it comes from a full cup, and something else entirely when it comes from depletion, how the women in my mother's generation and my generation were taught that giving until there was nothing left was a form of love, how we confused exhaustion with virtue. I loved my son. I love him still. But love is not the same as erasure, and I had been erasing myself so slowly and so completely that I had almost become invisible even to myself. I am 64 years old. I have good years ahead of me, God willing. I intend to live them in my own house, at my own table, with my coffee the way I like it and my puzzle pieces wherever I please. I brewed a fresh cup that Wednesday morning, and I opened the kitchen window just a little, even though it was cold. The air came in clean and sharp and real. I had forgotten what that felt like. I have thought a lot about what it means to cause something by doing nothing. Not the dramatic kind of causing, not cruelty, not malice. The quiet kind. The kind where you keep saying yes because saying no feels like the opposite of love. Where you move your own coffee mug to a different shelf and tell yourself it doesn't matter. Where you go upstairs with your leftover soup and sit in the dark and tell yourself that this is what mothers do. I caused 11 months of that. Not because I was foolish, and not because I didn't see the signs. I saw them. I caused it because I had spent so long believing that my discomfort was a small price to pay for keeping the peace, that I had forgotten the peace was mine to keep in the first place. That is the thing about generosity when it comes from fear. It doesn't look like fear from the inside. It looks like love. It feels like patience and flexibility and being the bigger person. And all of that may even be true partway, but underneath it, if you are honest, there is something else. The fear that if you stop giving, you will stop being loved. That the people you have held up will simply let you fall. Caleb is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because I think it would be easier, tidier, if you were. But he is a person who let comfort become expectation, who let my silence become permission, who looked the other way at a spreadsheet he didn't want to understand. That is its own kind of failure, and he is reckoning with it now. The reckoning is not comfortable for either of us, but I think it is the most honest thing that has happened between us in years. Renee is a different matter, and I have made my peace with not fully understanding her. What I understand is this: I cannot change what she believes she is owed. I can only change what I am willing to give. And Nadia, 15 years old and wiser than most adults I know, she said the thing I needed to hear not because she had read it somewhere, but because she had watched me for years, and she was frightened by what she saw. She was frightened of a woman making herself smaller and calling it love. That frightened her because she is a young woman herself, and she did not want that to be the example. She did not want to inherit that particular lesson. I think about that often. The things we teach without meaning to. The way our children and grandchildren are watching us always, filing away what we do when things get hard, when we feel unseen, when someone we love takes more than they should. We can give them the lesson of the leftover soup, that this is what you accept because family is family. Or we can give them the lesson of the Monday morning when you put on your good blouse and you drive to the bank and you do the quiet, unglamorous, necessary work of reclaiming your own life. I chose the Monday morning. Late, maybe. Later than I should have. But the timing doesn't erase the choice, and the choice was mine to make. I spread my puzzle pieces across the dining room table, and I left them there for 3 days. And nobody said a word, and that silence was worth more to me than I can explain. You build a life by accumulating small dignities, and you can lose it the same way, one small surrender at a time, until you look up and you are eating soup alone in a house you own. I am 64. I intend to spend whatever years I have left at my own table, in my own chair, with my coffee, exactly the way I like it. That is not stubbornness. That is not selfishness. That is just the simple, hard, necessary work of being a person who is still here.